Listen now to the reading today from the New Testament letter of James. Hear this word. James writing to the early Christian communities with this counsel. Be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who observes his natural face in a mirror. For he observes himself and goes away and at once forgets what he was like. But he who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer that forgets, but a doer that acts, he shall be blessed in his doing. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, that man's religion is in vain. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God and the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. What does it profit, my brethren, if a man says he has faith, but has not works? Can his faith save him? If a brother or sister is ill-clad and in lack of daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, be warmed and filled," without giving them the things needed for the body, what does it profit? So, faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of God shall stand forever. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Let us pray. Grant, O Lord, that we might be the masters of ourselves to become the servants of others. Take our minds and think through them. Take our lips and speak through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire for Thee. Amen. Well, this is the second installment of a little three-part winter sermon series. This month I am preaching on something that's long been part of our Methodist heritage, what came to be known as John Wesley's 3 Simple Rules. And as I say that, I know that not everybody who comes here is Methodist, but I think one of the things that I pride our denomination, and certainly one of the things I pride this congregation on, is the fact that we look at denominational differences and different traditions, having different religious backgrounds. That's a strength rather than a problem, and we're happy to welcome here people of all different backgrounds. But be that as it may, I thought that with a new year ahead, it would be worth looking at some of the nuances and emphases that were kind of central to the thought of John Wesley, our Methodist founder and the namesake of this congregation. I thought all of us to come here, it would be helpful to know some of the things that Wesley felt were central to living a faithful life. And among those things, or really central among them, were the 3 simple rules. As I mentioned last week when we got started, the rules emerged out of a need. When the early Methodist societies began convening within the Church of England back in the 1730s, there were early small groups that met for Bible study and service and kind of mutual spiritual support. They didn't meet very long before they felt they needed a little direction. So they asked John Wesley for some rules to help give structure to those meetings and kind of guide their actions as they kind of worked for reform and spiritual growth in their own lives. And in response, Wesley developed rules for the movement. Not a lot of rules, just 3. First, do no harm. Second, do good. And third, Wesley said it this way: attend upon the ordinances of God. Or as Methodists would later translate it, stay in love with God. That is, nurture your spiritual life. We talked last week about the first rule, do no harm, and Wesley gave specific examples of the kinds of harm we ought to avoid. Doing harm to ourselves, kind of not recognizing our body as a temple of God and neglecting our health or engaging in addictive behaviors that harm us, all of those kinds of things. Don't harm yourself, Wesley said. Don't harm others. Don't overreact or respond with, anger for anger. Be measured, not reactive in your interactions with difficult people. And do no harm to God. Do no harm to yourself. Do no harm to others. Do no harm to God. And Wesley believed doing harm to God happened when you did harm to the things God loved, the creation. Over-consuming, having a lifestyle that was needlessly exuberant so that it caused damage to the creation. Don't do harm in those three ways. And interestingly, I actually heard from a couple of you who emailed me to say that you'd intentionally tried that this week. Good for you. When somebody said something that irritated you, you said, can I live up to my values rather than just react? Which is always the harder thing to do. Can I treat myself with respect? Can I, be careful, minimize the harm I do to the environment? Good for you. It's not easy to live that way. I read that Reuben Job, who wrote a little book on John Wesley's 3 Simple Rules, he got so much feedback from his little book that he began, when he would give speeches on this subject, he'd have to say, first of all, Wesley called them the simple rules. He didn't call them the easy rules. And there's a lot of truth in that. Today is also a rule that's simple but not easy. The rule, do good. And here are John Wesley's exact words as it relates to this particular rule that he gave the early societies. Back in 1730, he wrote this: "It is expected of all who continue in the Methodist societies and classes that they should continue to evidence their desire for salvation by doing good, by being in every kind merciful after their power as they have opportunity, doing good of every possible sort as far as possible to all." And if you were, that's a little bit stilted, but it does remind me, do you remember the other famous quote about Wesley that we say it here from time to time? Do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. That was Wesley's famous, it's called the Methodist can in some circles, But there is that sense that you have a choice to make in the kind of way you carry yourself. That was his counsel to the societies. And it's interesting to think a little more deeply about what Wesley meant by doing good all the times, places, ways, to all the people you can. And like we did last week, I think you get a pretty good sense of what Wesley had in mind by doing good by just looking at his own language and the examples he himself practiced for the early classes. Though it does help to remember that, like 270 years have passed now, so it does need a little bit of translating to have relevance for us. But here's what I've got for you this morning. Here are 3 examples of what Wesley had in mind by doing good. First, in doing good to all, do good, Wesley wrote, to their bodies, of the ability which God giveth, by giving food to the hungry, clothing to the naked, visiting and helping them that are sick or in prison. For Wesley, you first do good for people by caring for them physically and their bodily needs. That's built right into our Methodist DNA, that religion is as much about the physical as it is the spiritual. And Wesley, there was good reason why he would focus in that way. He lived in a time when the Industrial Revolution was just getting up ahead of steam, literally, in urban England in the time, in London. And there was this growing migration of people from the poor farming communities of England into the big cities to work as factory laborers, including child laborers, as the steam engines now were gearing up and work was being done. And in many ways, it was a very socially callous and harsh time for a lot of new settlers into the urban area, having come from the farms looking for work. And Wesley said, a commitment to do good means, first of all, seeing to it that nobody's going hungry and that people's basic needs are cared for. It reminds me very much the famous quote from Mahatma Gandhi: "There are people in the world who are so hungry that God cannot appear to them except in the form of bread." Remember that quote? The basic need of basic way of expressing care for somebody who's in desperate need is not to start giving them a theological inquiry or asking about the state of their soul. It's just getting some food in their stomachs and getting them in out of the cold. And in that way, of course, it echoes very much themes from the New Testament. I think of Jesus' famous parable of the Last Judgment. Wesley used that very word. When Jesus says the Last Judgment itself hinges not on your doctrines, do you have the right ideas about God in your head, but of course, you remember he tells that wonderful story. When God sets the sheep from the goats, he asks one question. Did you care for the hungry? I was hungry, you gave me food. Thirsty, you gave me drink. Naked, and you clothed me. Sick, and you visited me. In prison, you came to me. And of course, there are two groups. What I love about that particular parable is everybody in the parable is surprised. The ones who think they are going to be ushered into the pearly gates, they say, "Wait a minute, why are we not getting in? We didn't know when we saw you hungry and turned away from you, or thirsty and didn't do that." And he says, "Well, you didn't do it to the least of these. You didn't do it to me." And the ones who get welcomed in say, "Us? We get in? When did we see thee? We didn't realize." He said, just those little acts. Well, you did it to the least of these. You did it to me. Very much ingrained in Wesley's thinking, the importance of caring for the least. Religion without compassion is a hollow shell. And that, of course, is the theme of the book of James. Be doers of the word, not hearers only. We heard that this morning. Lest you deceive yourselves. What good is it if you have faith but do not have works? If a brother is naked and lacks food and you say, "Eat, you're filled, keep warm," but do nothing to respond, what good is that? So faith by itself, if it has no works, James said, is dead. You may know, do you know that the early church fathers struggled over whether or not to put that particular book in the Bible? Some leaders thought the message of James should be left out because it would confuse people into thinking that salvation was something you did by works rather than received by grace. Martin Luther in particular, he hated the book of James. He called it an epistle of straw, and he thought it was an argument against Paul and Paul's famous, by grace are you saved through faith, it is not your own doing. So he wanted the book of James left out of the New Testament canon, and there was a lot of wrangling back and forth about it all. But eventually, they settled on the idea that James was important to include, mostly because it was a corrective to a misreading of Paul that happened in the first century. The problem was that Paul had almost done his job too well. Luther was right. Paul came preaching, you are saved by faith and not by your works. You're not saved by what you do, but by what God has already done for you in Christ. But the problem with that was that people began to say, "Oh, great. I'll just accept my gift of grace and live contentedly and happy and call it good. I'll take care of me first, and now that I've got my salvation right, let's call it a done deal." It was James was a corrective to that, the early church fathers said. James was a way of saying, it's not all about you and your own private salvation. If that's all that motivates you to be faithful, that you can get yourself lined up for a big reward, basically that's just another form of spiritual selfishness. Faithful only because of the payoff. It's a dead faith, James said, because of the motivation is so self-centered. And Methodism picked that up. And very early on in our history, we started to have not just Bible studies and spiritual small groups of encouragement, but also they began to open hospitals and orphanages and schools and universities and graduate schools because it was built right into the Methodist DNA that you got to care for the whole person. It's not just about our spiritual self. We're holistic, it's all interconnected. Your psyche from your soma, your body and your spirit, all of those are together. And I read that if you go to Old Mutare in Zimbabwe, where we have Africa University, this church has been so instrumental in giving to Africa University over the years. They now have a statue at the entry to Africa University in Old Mutare that has 4 sides with 4 images that represent Methodism in Zimbabwe. And on one side there is a picture of a plow because people need to be fed and they need to eat. On another side there is a picture of a stethoscope because people need health care. And on a third side there is a picture of a school because people need to learn. And then on the fourth side there is a picture of a pulpit because people need to pray. That's a very Methodist understanding of faith. All of those things interwoven to care for the whole person, not just one piece. And so first, Wesley said, you do good by caring for people's physical and bodily concrete welfare. And then secondly, here's what Wesley said, you also do good to people, to their souls, by instructing, reproving, exhorting all we have in any conversation therewith. Now, that may sound a little prudish framed in the language of that time. I thought about it. If I got a call from somebody who said they wanted to come to me because they wanted to instruct, reprove, and exhort me, I'd probably want to go the other way in a hurry. But it's an interesting question, you know. What does it mean to care for people's souls? How open are we to conversations with people about questions that really matter in life? You know, so much of our conversations tend to be so shallow, you know, about things that really, in the grand scheme of things, don't matter much. But I think all of us at some level, and Wesley believed this, we're created for relationship, and we're created for deep connections with others. It's only been in the last, 20 or 30 years that scientists have recognized that infants need human interaction, or they literally will, the language is fail to thrive, right? I mean, I guess scientists have done studies with infants that have been raised in remote orphanages where they haven't gotten emotional closeness with anybody, and they don't grow. They literally just can't progress as they're intended to progress. They kind of die on the vine unless they experience both physical and emotional closeness with somebody else. And what I think people often don't realize, though Wesley, way back in the 1730s, did realize it, is that need for connection is present in all of us. It never goes away. It continues throughout life. And so he said it's a spiritual calling that we have, if we follow Jesus, to spend time with others in ways, you know, not just doing business or having fun, but engaging in support and conversations that go deeper, you know, to provide a forum for somebody to confide in us and be a confidant for somebody, to ask to offer our own counsel to others in a humble way, to listen to others about how their life is going. And it's probably a good spiritual question to ask ourselves occasionally. When's the last time I invited somebody into a deeper conversation about life's meaning, or when I sought somebody else out for that very thing? When's the last time I just sat and helped somebody listen to their pain or their puzzlement? Angie preached on this a couple weeks back now about how the fact that so many of us need more friendships in our lives. It's part of overcoming that, you know, failure to thrive syndrome that never goes away. And Wesley said one of the ways we do good, not just by caring for people's physical needs, you know, sending volunteers out to the orphanage in Nicaragua this week to work on their building, that's one way, but also by paying attention to others' questions and the need we all have for a connection in life that's beyond the superficial. And then there's one other aspect in the examples Wesley gave the early societies. Wesley said we should do good by running with patience the race that is set before us, denying ourselves, taking up our cross daily, submitting to bear the reproach of Christ, to be, listen to this, as the filth and offscouring of the world, looking that people should say all manner of evil against us falsely for the Lord's sake. Yikes! Isn't that what does that mean? What does that mean, to be as the filth and offscouring of this world? I confess to you, I read that and I'm like, I'm leaving that out. I don't know what that even means. I'd never even heard the word. Have you heard that word, offscouring? I looked it up. It's just what you think it is. Something that is scoured off or disposed of. That is kind of like the bottom of the pot. The off-scouring. Yuck. Okay, this is the off-scouring. It's often used in the plural, and it's second meaning, a person regarded as fallen from society and outcast. I had to go, Dean Snyder was my counterpart over at Foundry United Methodist Church in Washington, D.C. for many years, and I found online he had written a little piece on the off-scouring of God. And I thank God for Dean, because I needed help to kind of interpret that. And what Dean said is, for Wesley, and I think it makes some sense, it is his way of saying, sometimes being a person of faith requires you to take unpopular stands that will cause people to regard you as off-scouring. I dismiss you completely. Sometimes it's just necessary to stand up for what is right, even if it means you are cast aside. Sometimes you just got to be principled and let the chips fall where they may, even if it requires you to be the off-scouring. And Wesley certainly knew a lot about that. He took a stand against slavery at a time when only radicals and fanatics opposed slavery, the early 1700s in England. Wesley, did you know he got his hair cut only once a year so he could save the money he would spend on barbers and give it to the poor? And he went door to door, often begging for money to support these little institutions that he was beginning in London, for the orphanages and the soup kitchens. As an Anglican priest, Wesley knew a lot about positioning himself in ways that people didn't like him and thought that he was too extreme. He was oftentimes barred from preaching in various Anglican churches in England, because wherever Wesley preached, as his popularity began to grow, the poor would show up in these churches because they loved him. And there were a lot of those Anglican churches in the urban centers of London that didn't want all those poor folks filling up the churches. Maybe one or two, but when Wesley preached, they would fill the place. And so Wesley said, sometimes you just got to be principled and let the chips fall where they may. If we're not willing to be off-scouring sometimes, we can't really do good. So there it is. That's a challenge. That's a challenge this week in a world where there is so much conflict, and where there is a world, where there is callousness to people at the margins of life. We stand in the history of a church at its best that says, do good. Live your life one day at a time, one choice at a time, with the benchmark being love. How much good you do. In that sense, the movement is being reborn just to this very day, with you and me as Christ's hands and heart and feet. And that's how the Methodist movement will continue for yet one more week. Amen.